Okay, good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to this month's Complete College Accelerator monthly webinar series. Today's conversation is going to be focused on the state and federal policy in student success. And today's presenter is going to be Dr. Andrew Morse, Interim Vice President for the University Relations at Central University or Central Washington University. We'll do a brief introduction and then we'll give the floor over to Dr. Morse.
Okay.
Andrew Morse came to Central Washington University in 2022 as Vice President for University Relations and Chief of Staff. Inspired by the university's vision to be the model learning community of equity and belonging, Andrew brings 15 years of higher education leadership and public policy experience focused on higher education access and student success, economic and community development, and quality of life. At Central Washington University, Morse leads the university's state and federal relations portfolio, economic and community development initiatives, and strategic marketing and communications. Currently, he is co-facilitating a project in partnership with the Washington Student Achievement Council to modernize admissions and financial aid policy and practice to expand higher education access and student success in Washington. Andrew has also led an acquisition for state appropriations for more than 800,000 square feet at CW's infrastructure from fossil fuels to geothermal energy. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Andrew Morse as he presents over the state and federal policies. Dr. Morse, you now have the floor.
Thank you. And good to be with all of you today, morning, afternoon, depending on where you're located. It's great to be with colleagues who share the CCA MO for inpatient reformation work. Really excited to be with you today. I'm going to kick my slides off here. Today we're here to talk about policy advocacy and the role that each of you all as higher education professionals and practitioners can have. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about a really important bifurcated role, which is, times where being part of the institutional conversation is going to be really important, and also empowering and creating some how-tos and cautions for personal advocacy as well. So in all of the spaces that you hold, you have an opportunity to elevate your very important voice and grounding student success in the policy issues of our time. So roadmap today, I'm going to start off by really centering the conversation in why policy advocacy and why you. And getting in there to talk about what are some strategies, things that you want to be cautious about given professional boundaries, policy boundaries that may exist at your institution or in your state contexts, and some tips that I have learned on the way in the state and federal advocacy that I've had a privilege to be part of in advancing student success at the state and federal levels. And then I want to share some resources that I have found very helpful, and I will break at the end of this for some Q&A. But if there are timely questions that pop up, please do not hesitate to ask them. Here to really be a resource for you and excited about the conversation. So I want to kind of start off the conversation by picking on a quote that I know that I have had told to me by a number of policy professionals, and that just kind of gets floated around, and some of you may have already heard it, and it's called, "The world is run by those who show up." And this, I think, helps to center the conversation in a call to action that not all of us have been invited to show up. And in fact, historically, our country has faced an enduring scourge of injustice that has not allowed certain populations to be present or visible in policy discussions. And I want to ground that as why it's really important for our collective voices in higher education policy and practice to, in fact, be active agents in the policy discourse and policy development processes. And it also recognizes that as our field diversifies and gains in representation from one generation to the next, that policy structures and actions have largely been crafted without broad inclusion. And so elevating our voices is an ever continuing necessity that I just want to empower and affirm in this conversation. And the other piece of that is that with your lived experience and because of the time you've spent studying, supporting students, gaining professional experience, you're developing subject matter expertise in ways that, in my experience in state and federal advocacy, is oftentimes absent. And so being intentional, learning how and why and the ways in which you can advocate becomes extremely important. And really, this is a call that as a sector, we really do need to rethink how we leverage the collective expertise on our campuses, in our trade organizations, to develop a really ground up view of the way that higher ed around student success should be organized through policy. And so hoping that we can have some important conversations and dialogue today about that. In my teaching of higher education law and policy, and in my practice work, I've really been able to see how policy dialogue really boils down to questions of how many or how much. At the state level in Iowa, every single legislative cycle, we would be asked to analyze and comment on about 150 to 200 bills legislative cycle. And these things would range from really specific operational matters like, can the universities in the state develop more shared services for mail or laundry or things like that, to really broad and encompassing conversations that impact equity-centered access for students, the ability for faculty to have academic freedom in the classroom, and a host of matters in between. And what was being asked of the university is to compile data and anecdotal examples that would help tell the story of the impact. And so a lot of what we were trying to do was demonstrate how many people, whether it's students, faculty, staff, administration, would be impacted by a particular piece of legislation, and at what level would they be impacted. The other really boiled down to how much is a particular policy going to cost. And so being able to quantify, but also tell stories becomes really important, and why we leaned so importantly on our subject matter experts. So in that process, at the University of Northern Iowa, where I served as the liaison to our board of regents, I had to develop out a list of subject matter experts in partnership with our university leadership team, where subject matter experts in advising, admissions, financial aid, the registrar's office, diversity, equity, and inclusion programming and resources, a variety of other student affairs, academic affairs functions. And I would ask these people, given the particular piece of legislation, how would you imagine this impacting your area? And we had to literally quantify what a very specific piece of legislation would do for our campus. And an example of that, just to kind of illuminate how specific it can get and how important subject matter experts are in this conversation, is when I was working at the State University System of Florida, every single year, a lawmaker would introduce a bill that would create a tuition waiver for every student who earned a B or better in elementary Portuguese to take advanced 2 years of Portuguese tuition free. And we had to identify the financial cost associated with that, which included not only understanding what the current financial environment is, but once you create an incentive at no additional cost, how might you estimate for that? And so we had to do background analysis. We had to use population statistics. We had to look at enrollment patterns and student success patterns in a very specific set of course sequences. And, as a policy guy, I don't know everything, even close to it. And I had to rely on my teams, people that actually understood the course sequences at each of the Florida institutions in order to help quantify and tell that story. So this can be very broad, it can be very specific. In all that we aim to do, it's important to also center our organizational mission and values. Central Washington University, as an example, has a vision to be a model learning community of equity and belonging. And our unique character as a regional comprehensive university, both of those things really create importance and nuance in how we respond to bills relative to other institutions that hold a different vision statement and that serve a different student demography. So for instance, when we think about higher education budget bills, we have to apply the lens that we are a large residential population, as opposed to one that has a high non-resident population, which affects tuition revenue, right? So in addition to thinking about the numerical impact, we also have to center who we are as an institution, who the population is that we're serving at creating our response. And the other important piece that we have in telling our story and using our voice in organizational policy advocacy is that we have to think about the language that we're using, and we have to think about making sure that we're always being honest with what we're saying. And what I have come to learn is that words really matter. For example, when I was in the state of Iowa, we were, as a university there, a regional comprehensive, looking to lean into our mission to serve a highly residential population. One that has been mitigated through geographic place-boundedness for years. There were thousands of adult learners who were out of reach at being able to uproot their lives and move their families to a public four-year institution. And we were interested in fixing that. And when one of the stimulus packages came about through the pandemic, the university saw an opportunity to leverage some of the state and local recovery funds to close education deserts in the state. And I worked with our subject matter experts in our faculty and in our financial aid and student services offices to create a program that I'll talk about in a later slide. But in conversations where concepts can be misunderstood, or perhaps there's political division associated with them. We had to make a very calculated decision about what to call the financial aid offering. And one of the things that we decided to do was use the word future ready scholarships, because it tagged on to a major state initiative that thus far the university was written out of, when in reality, these were equity-centered scholarships that helped reduce and eliminate the difference between community college and four-year university tuition for individuals who had completed an AA at one of the schools that we were partnering with, to be able to jump into a four-year bachelor's degree program on site and not have a difference in tuition. What we noticed was that when we shifted the language of the scholarship, it went from a we're not necessarily comfortable with this to a let's fund this thing. And sometimes those are concessions or decisions that are difficult, but in order to make things happen and get a policy objective done, we're figuring out ways to align with state conversations and state efforts. The other thing I'll mention, and this is why I put the tortoise here, this is the university's tortoise, by the way. He just had a work anniversary, actually, is that policy advocacy takes time. The work around the UNI program that I'll talk about in a second took a couple of years. There's a federal law I'm going to talk about here in a minute that is still pending and began in 2019. This work requires patience, and really closely tethered to that is persistence. And so I want to encourage you all not to get discouraged when, over a cycle, you might not get all the way toward an objective that you're passionate about. But being able to take steps toward that ultimate goal is also a really important accomplishment. I want to give some examples from my professional life that speak to using the tools that I just mentioned. Being able to use existing data to quantify an impact, using stories to help add texture to your response or your advocacy effort, knowing that how you use language and creating a bridge between people who might have different objectives or interests really becomes really important. And these examples here are how I've been able to use those tools in my professional life. So I've broken out into two buckets, and this is reactive, or when the universities that I have served have had to respond to policy development that has originated from lawmakers, and those that have actually been developed with a grounding in the subject matter expertise of the field up to our legislative partners. Those are two very important buckets, because really I've found quite a bit of a practical difference in the pace, but also I think the quality and the meaningfulness of both. So of those proposed to higher education, one year, the legislature proposed a full tuition waiver for any student enrolled in a quote-unquote high-demand program in the state of Iowa. The concept high demand was not defined in statute. And what they wanted to do was, if there was a job that had more openings than there were graduates, that they would want to incentivize behavior so that the graduates in that program, or the graduates in the program, would stay in the state after receiving a tuition waiver. And what I did was use existing data resources and I point to some of them later in the presentation for you, to help quantify the impact that this bill could have if it were enacted. Some of you may have already used what's called the Bureau of Labor Statistics and U.S. Department of Education SIP to SOC crosswalk. And it is a tool that broadly measures the programs from which students tend to complete programs that end up getting employment in certain occupations. And most of the academic programs, or the SIP codes, align with at least 2 or 3 other occupations. And so we used the SIP to SOC crosswalk to show, of those jobs, so the SOC code, which is the standard classification code for jobs in the United States under the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we were able to map which graduates, how many of our current students would then graduate and go into one of these high demand jobs. And it was something like 90% of our students were enrolled in at least one program that was considered high demand for purposes of the law in Iowa. And so it would have effectively bankrupted the institution. Instead, we were offering solutions or alternatives, which was, more in-state financial aid for our low to moderate income students. Things that actually would sustain the university and contribute to student success. Another, I had the opportunity to work for the system office as the legislature created, and the system office helped in the implementation of Florida Polytechnic University. And the original concept of Florida Poly was that it was going to be a predominantly industry expert instructional model. That wasn't the system office's idea. That was some of our lawmaker colleagues thinking about how they wanted to design the institution. And working for the system office, I used existing resources in regional accreditation standards to point to the fact that faculty need to own the curriculum. And they outline, what the role of faculty is, and the concept of shared governance, and all of those things. And regional accreditation is incredibly important to maintain eligibility for federal aid. So with that existing resources and the leverage that came with it, we were able to help educate and influence the process so that the university would have a complement of full-time and tenure-track faculty to help develop and administer the curriculum. On the more proactive side, 2 legislative efforts that I'm really excited about. In 2019, the University of Northern Iowa decided it was going to, as a state leading entity in educator prep, partner with national orgs to help influence what the federal role should be in educator preparation relative to a common set of challenges across the states. Things like declining enrollments in teacher prep programs, things like high attrition of currently practicing teachers. And so we started a convening of subject matter experts from 15 states who gathered at UNI in June of 19, along with the American Association of State Colleges and Universities and the Teacher Education Council for State Colleges and Universities, and outlined an initial framework that I then took on the road to about 450 educators. And I did a conference tour that brought me to interact with other shareholders in higher ed and policy spaces from about 40 states. And each cycle of feedback further refined what became a bicameral piece of legislation still pending in Congress called the Educators for America Act. And over 5 years upon enactment, it would authorize $1 billion each year in spending to support appropriate to scale solutions that respond to the teacher recruitment and retention crisis facing the United States. That was a really fun one to work on because it actually was a ground view of what the field sees, given its expertise in the area, as critical next steps. And it earned the support thus far of about 30 co-sponsors. But it's a long process, and we're still working on it. The other one was UNI Iowa Community Colleges, and that's the one I talked about earlier, where we closed education deserts in the state by bringing advocacy for our students and their success to the forefront. What we did was stand up direct pathways into bachelor's degrees on site at community colleges in Iowa, where their service area lived 60 miles or greater away from a public four-year institution, which is defined in the literature as an education desert. And because of that work and working to secure funding with the governor's office and some philanthropic supports, we were able to stand up a direct pathway that now serves adult and place-bound learners in the state in ways that hadn't been before. And that was about, again, engaging the voice and having the proactive support of subject matter experts that whose voices were critical to the success of that initiative. So what I really wanted to capture on this slide is that bringing your voices to policy discussions is absolutely critical. And knowing how and where to access existing information and putting it together in a story is really, really important. I want to, as we think about advocacy, create some really important guideposts for you. One of these is, and I'm sure many members of your federal delegations won't appreciate this, but in personal advocacy, what I've learned in lobbying, especially at the federal level, is they have newbie staff at the front desks taking phone calls all day, and you might bring a really well-informed perspective, but stopping at that level of advocacy is not going to achieve the objectives that I believe you're wanting to bring to that conversation. What I would in fact do is not just call your rep, I would ask who the staff member is that works on education or workforce development or basic needs support, get that person's name and email address, and I would email that person with your very thoughtful, diplomatically put together analysis. Because just calling the office, they keep a tally of pro con. They don't always keep the notes. And so giving yourself that direct line to the subject matter expert staff that is tasked with staffing that issue for the member is the most direct way to have influence with your elected leaders. And I just want to encourage that. It's something that I've learned lobbying on the Hill. And engage at the local level. One of the examples I had was when I was a student, I went to my first legislative town hall, and I talked about textbook prices being too high. And as a result of that, one of our local lawmakers was listening and ran a bill that it ended up dying at the last hour. But it would have mandated certain things around textbook transparency so that students could search and get their most preferred price, whether at the bookstore or online. But that was just because I decided to attend a local town hall and ask a curious question and raise a genuine concern kindly. And the other thing that I found very helpful, especially for us employed in higher education, is to avoid the presumption that we are speaking on behalf of an institution, really being proactive to say, while this is my professional role, I am not speaking on behalf of the organization on this particular matter that is of personal importance to me. That's just really good, cover your boundary kind of work. On the professional side, and related to that last point, is being sure to know your university's policy and process for how the university takes positions and who specifically at your campus is involved. One of the things that I've experienced is staff members not knowing that process. And I'll get a phone call from a federal lawmaker saying, hey, you guys just got earmarked funding. We really appreciate the letter that you wrote in support of that request. And I won't have any line of sight into it. That's not good because when your federal delegation, if they were to understand or come to know that the request didn't come from the top, it can impact the legitimacy of requests that come later. And so knowing that process and following it to the T is really, really important. And this is also especially true for matters where the relationship with your state and local delegation is of critical importance to achieve the organization's objectives, and making sure that there's consistency in the voice of the institution. The other is as it relates to media. When journalists, if they can get a hold of just anybody at an organization, they will run with it. And knowing how those processes work as well is important to make sure that, again, the integrity of the institution's voice, knowing that reporters and lawmakers are especially talking with an entity and not individual people who happen to work at that entity is really important. The other thing is, in my experience, government relations teams benefit greatly by the depth of their bench. I love being able to call on my immigration, my Title IX, my campus police, my compliance team that deals with racial or gender discrimination, those kinds of things, our financial aid experts on the slew of bills that we see at the federal and state levels. And so I want to encourage you all, as you think about engaging in advocacy on the professional or personal levels, that you continue to build your subject matter expertise to be an even more effective voice than you already are. All of us continue to learn in our lives, and being able to do that in a way that enhances your ability to impact student success through advocacy within your professional organization or as a person, that's all the better for all of us. And I also want to encourage you all, many of our institutions have policies prohibiting the use of institutional resources for political activity, and using the workday, using your employer's computer or telephone, and in some cases, the university's organization spaces can also create political challenges on the campus and for you as an employee. So I'm just word of caution is to be very careful about that. At a previous employer, the one individual wasn't paying enough attention to their Gmail, and their Gmail was both one set on their phone was their personal one and one was their employer one, and they accidentally sent a message to an appropriations chair in the state of Iowa, demanding a certain action take place, but they accidentally sent it from their university email and created problems for themselves and the institution because essentially that person ran afoul of state law by using the email account to advocate. And so just a note to take extra care of, even when you're intending to use your personal resources, just make sure you're not on your employer email to avoid trouble down the way. These are a set of resources that I have found extremely helpful. IPEDS, this integrated post-secondary education data system. They have a trove of variables about every Title IV receiving institution in the United States on things like retention, completion, enrollment, budget data, employee complement data, and using these to compare your organization relative to, similarly situated institutions to help tell a story of how you're stewarding resources, I have found to be very helpful. Looking at my institutions I've served on our retention and other student success indicators compared to similarly situated others has helped to ground perceptions where, why isn't your organization performing better on these metrics? Well, we serve an access-focused population, and the reason we're asking for resources is so that we can do better by way of these students and do better by way of the employees that serve them. IPEDS has been a really important set of data to help tell stories. EdTrust also has a more automated tool that sort of front loads similarly situated comparators. It's called the EdTrust College Results Online Database. And you can look at things like graduation, student debt, retention rates, employment outcomes, those kinds of things. It's really fascinating, great resource. Another resource I look at to get a sense of state by state trends in policy is the Education Commission of the State's Policy Tracker. Now, this is an important resource because the literature points to the fact that when policy originates in one state, there is an effect of that same policy sort of spreading to surrounding states. And some of that is driven by special interest groups. Some of it is driven by the fact that lawmakers get together and talk. Education Commission of the States is one place where that happens. The National Conference of State Legislatures is another. The National Governors Association is yet another. And the State Policy Tracker helps me kind of understand what the lay of the land looks like on a host of policy issues, DEI related, transfer related, admissions related, accountability related, assessment related, a variety of resources. And I found this ICPA policy brief writing guide to give me some really helpful tips at making sure that audience is front and center, that being efficient with language while reaching a lay audience is important. And all of these are backed up into a URL, and CCA will be sending this out to the registrants, so you'll be able to click on and access those right after this presentation. And I want to invite you to keep in touch. I mentioned Educators for America, the act that was developed from the ground up earlier. This is actually the picture the night before more folks joined us, and we had a 2-day policy session where we ironed out a ground level view from educators, policymakers, college and university leaders, what the future of ed prep should look like. And so I wanted to share that little artifact of colleagues just like you and me bringing their voices into important advocacy discussions and being part of the ecosystem that has helped to build momentum at the federal level for how we can grow, diversify, and retain our nation's educator workforce through one strand of policy advocacy. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out to me by email, and then that is my direct office line if you ever want to chat. I really want to hear from all of you and engage in some Q&A. And so why don't we open it up for that?
This was a great presentation. I think for me, it's also timely. One of the meetings that I was in earlier this morning was around some of the new executive orders
Yes.
impacting our students in terms of their financial aid, like the Pell eligible students with those types of grants, and just the secondary effects and impacts. So I'm just sitting here kind of paralyzed feeling, but also thinking
Yeah.
about, how we can be proactive within our own obvious systems, but collectively in terms of advocacy around these emerging issues that we never saw as being
Yeah.
possible.
Yes. Yeah. This is such an even more complicated time for us in higher ed. And um, uh, especially for those of us who already felt urgency around systemic change in education and throughout society. And so like, let me just kind of like center with some empathy and care that right now, many of us are probably feeling frustrated, maybe even hopeless. And, it's important to know that there are those of us out there that can lift one another up. I'm struggling myself. I got into education because of what I felt was a really important and urgent need for human and civil rights at the center of policy discussion around equity. And so this is a really hard time. So there are a number of questions that are pointed here. So Shri, I'm gonna say I think the time for good trouble is now. And I'll give some examples. When I was at the University of Northern Iowa, I started there in 2017. And then after Trump lost the election in 2020, the executive order that banned diversity trainings for employees, it was beaten in the court, but then you also remember President Biden rescinded the order day one in office. Well, Iowa lawmakers having significant majorities of one party in the House and the Senate, and then that same party in the governor's office, they copy and pasted that executive order in a state law, and they pulled the lobbyists together and they said, this law is happening, and this is your opportunity to help shape it. And if you fight us on it, we're going to make your lives hell. That's literally what they said. And so what we decided to do was poke about every hole we possibly could in that law. And so, for instance, they tried to mandate what couldn't be taught in the curriculum at colleges and universities. And we used regional accreditation standards to push back on that. They were very insistent that a presenter of a workplace training not be able to say, and I'll use the word so-called, the phrase so-called, so-called divisive concepts. It was the things that were laid out in the Trump executive order.
I'm very familiar, having come
Yeah.
from Florida.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. You couldn't, as the presenter, say those things. Well, there was nothing to say that someone in the presentation couldn't bring up a question during that training, right? And so what we did after that, we poked as many holes as we could in the law, is the university attorney and I wrote guidance, and we went and did a ton of trainings about what is still permitted in the law, and taught best practices and helped especially clarify what the law didn't say, right? And the sense of urgency there was felt when I got a call from a scholarship, or one of our departments, about a scholarship, and they said, can we name a scholarship after Frederick Douglass? And I said, oh my goodness, like, this is creating such a chilly climate that people are even wondering if they can name scholarships after civil rights luminaries, right? And so we have got to get on this, and we have got to help our university understand at a department and an employee level what latitudes they still have. And the other thing that I'm hopeful about, so in Washington, there is actually a concerted effort to leverage AGs. And so to the extent that your university leaders can coordinate where possible, and I know across the screen here, there's going to be varying levels of capacity for this, to try and, challenge or push where appropriate, and leverage the state role so that your institution isn't necessarily liable or vulnerable. And the other is, one of the things I love about Complete College America, it uses a model of collective expertise to help network or crowdsource ideas and share what's working and what's not. And so, touching base with your networks and figuring out how you're navigating these challenges is important. And I just shared one about my experience working in a policy role in Iowa, but I'm also watching, our Attorney General, Nick Brown, challenge some of the decisions that are being made around birthright citizenship and other things that are happening federally at the moment. So we still have avenues, and I want to continue to sort of emphasize the presence of hope there. And even though we might have to retrench or shift our approach a little bit, we still have one another, and there are still pathways to continue the work moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Morse. Nia, hi there. I'm with CCA.
Hey, Nia.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good.
For everyone on the call, I'm Vice President of Institutional Transformation and Scaling at CCA. And if you don't mind, I know that thank you for your presentation. It's been really, really helpful. And I know also that there's lots of anxiety around what's happening nationally with the federal pause, as Cherie just mentioned. CCA has, we're beginning to issue just some guidance from what we are learning. And if it's okay, I'd love to just read these little points to you all, and then I can put in the chat, just to respond to like the question that you have. This just came through. And so this is just for you kind of to know. So I'm going to read what we are sending out. So we sent this to the policy leads, and it said, hope you are well. I'm sure you're tracking news from updates stemming from the federal funding pause and what's known about that. A few quick items we can share as this evolves. So this is the guidance that we've received. Number one is the department clarified the pause does not apply to Title IV aid to students, including Pell and direct loans. These are exempt. Number two, the pause will be temporary, likely ending February 10th. Number three, agencies will review the pause that starts at 5 Eastern today along a detailed spreadsheet which I'm going to upload into the chat here. And then number 4, programs like TRIO are on the list of programs to be reviewed and wasn't part of the department's initial comments about programs that won't qualify for the pause, but TRIO funding does go directly to individuals, so the situation is clearly fluid and evolving for these and other programs. So it also says it's wise to check federal grant agreements to see if there are any terms that may allow for suspension of work and remedies if work is suspended. So that is, of course, not going to solve all of our problems as it relates to this, but for our partners, many who have contacted us around whether or not federal financial aid and Pell will be impacted, I just want to reiterate, as I think Pamela had put in the chat, that those are exempt. And I'm going to add the 2 documents that we have received that we can share around financial aid. And the actual letter, the memo.
Thank you, Nia.
You're welcome. So thanks for letting me share those things. So, and if
What
there's
CCA is
things
all
that you
about.
need, pardon me?
That's what CCA is all about. Love
Well,
it.
I mean, it was just, I mean, this
Yeah.
is completely coincidental because you've been scheduled for quite some time. And
Yeah.
then we have this event, this national tragedy that happens. So we so just know that CCA, we're trying to stay ahead of it or keep pace as best we can. And as we receive more information, we'll continue to share that. So thank you all.
No, I think you covered all the questions that were put in the chat and the conversation. Has been very helpful. And thank you, Dr. Heidel, for sharing that information to kind of keep everybody abreast of what's going on. We will share that information with all of the participants here today, as well as a copy of Dr. Morris's presentation and this recording. And so that if you have additional questions, his contact information has been shared so that you can contact him directly, and just know that CCA is here with you so that if you have any questions pertinent to what's going on currently, please feel free to reach out to us so that we can try to get as much information to share across all platforms. And be on the lookout for our next 2 upcoming webinar series on February 25th and March 25th, respectively. That information will be shared out via invitation, but please
I think
mark your
Monica
calendars now for those
her
dates.
internet is frozen. So what she was gonna say is be on the lookout for our upcoming
Can you hear me now? Okay, so February 25th and March 25th are our next 2 webinar series. So be on the lookout for those invitations. My apologies for the internet disruption. And with that, we will let everyone enjoy the rest of their afternoon, and please take care and stay abreast of all topics coming across your tables. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.